Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, dear students, dear colleagues, good evening. I'm very pleased to welcome you at the Graduate Institute for this event co-organized by the Global Migration Center and the Migrant Rights Initiative of Cornell University. This event will have two different timings in the sense that the first part is dedicated to the official launch of the Migrant Rights database. And then we will have a panel discussion with two eminent experts on the role of data to protect migrants' rights. The Migrant Rights database has an important role to play in providing an objective account of the law protecting migrants' rights at the domestic level. And there is a need to provide this kind of tool, empirical tool. Obviously, the normative framework governing migrants' rights is based on a rather detailed, sophisticated set of international rules. Human rights of migrants are deeply rooted in international law, and even more as a result of an incremental process of consolidation, a dense network of both conventional and customary rules currently govern the departure, admission, and stay of migrants. And the most emblematic and basic principles notably include the right to leave any country, of course, the principle of non-refoulement, the positive duties of family reunification, prohibition of collective expulsion, principle of non-discrimination, among others. These general principles apply to all migrants and in fact constitute the bedrock of international migration law. And this general normative framework is further supplemented and detailed by more specialized treaty regimes addressing some subcategories of migrants on the move, refugees and asylum seekers, migrant workers, victims of trafficking and smuggled migrants. So clearly, the main problem today is not the lack of international rules, but their poor record of implementation at the domestic level. And the reasons for this enduring gap are well known and numerous. The primitive fear of the stranger is exacerbated by the recurrent economic crises, the fear of terrorism, the rise of political manipulation and electioneering, and non-citizens as non-voters provide in turn an easy target for political electioneering and also the perfect excuse to mask the failure of political decision makers in addressing the social and economic difficulties and anxieties of their nationals. This tactic is not new. It has, however, gained considerable influence over the last years with the rise of anti-immigrant ideologies and also the growing racialization of political discourse. And on a more technical and legal plane, the implementation deficit of migrants' rights is also due to the limited reception in the domestic legal order. In many states, national legislation is not fully in line with international law, or does not incorporate international law, human rights of migrants, in a coherent and comprehensive manner. And of course, the way to redress these situations is fundamentally political. Much remains to be done in order to raise awareness of migrants' rights and to improve its implementation at the domestic level. And here, the need for reliable and comprehensive data is particularly important. And I'm very pleased to have this official launch of the Migrants' Rights database because there is a need more than ever for an evidence-based and objective account of migrants' rights at the domestic level. I have the pleasure today to have two key central persons for this adventure. Jan Matthew Keisel is with us, assistant clinical professor of law at the Cornell University, but also non-resident fellow at the Zollberg Institute on Migration and Mobility, and obviously the founder and director of the Migrant Rights Initiative. So I'm very pleased to have you here today. And then Dr. Justin Guest, who is an associate professor of policy and government at George Mason University. And he has been heavily involved also in this database and has, extensively published also on migration and politics, the politics of demographic change. Thank you very much. I'm giving you the floor for the presentation and the launch of this important migrants' rights database. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vincent. It's really hard to imagine a better place to launch this database for many reasons, chief among them your own expertise in this area, our gratitude for your service on the advisory board of the initiative, but also, and the role of the center here and in Geneva and in the field. But I should say also the longstanding partnership that we've had in this work. I've been thinking back now almost more than a decade when Vincent hosted 30 graduate students from around the world, from 3 continents, here in Geneva for a conference about drafting a migrant's Bill of Rights. The question was, what are the international laws common to protecting the rights of all migrants, regardless of their cause of their migration? And we spent time hearing from colleagues at really all of the key UN agencies, and it was the generosity of the Graduate Institute and of you, Vincent, that gave us the first and significant research product of our initiative, and represents, I think, our engagement with 3 big puzzles in this space. One is we have an increasingly mobile world. Climate change and other drivers will make global migration more complicated in the years to come, even though as a percentage of global population, migrants have not in the last 40 years become a more significant phenomenon demographically. It's still, the fact that in 2020, at the start of the pandemic, we had more than 272 million international migrants. So these dynamics are just going to get more complicated, and so thinking carefully about how law and governance, which are the other 2 puzzles that we engage, how can we engage the gaps in those areas, try to fill them, and push states to do better in relation to the baseline of rights that Vincent described in his opening remarks. So the initiative, as I mentioned, began with this research puzzle of, as a scholarly project, what is the research case that can be made in international law for a common set of rights for all migrants? This was a document that we drafted as a sort of declaratory instrument, and has given us the ability to engage in supporting several processes at the international and regional level. We're pleased to be able to support colleagues in connection with the drafting of the UN Declaration and the Global Compact, as well as pleased that OHCHR adopted our definition of migrant. But we've also been partnering at the regional levels to help the regional human rights systems through some technical assistance adapt the general principles that we have researched into their practice. So in 2019, we worked with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to support their adaptation of our work and the adoption of a set of inter-American principles on the rights of all migrants, and have had the great pleasure and honor of collaborating with Commissioner and Vice Chair Maya Safi Fadel, who is here this evening, on a similar initiative to support the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, considering a similar set of guiding principles based in African law and standards, but drawing on international obligations as well. So I'll now turn it over to Justin, but before I do, I'll just note that the work that we'll be presenting, like this long process of the initiative coming together, has been a lengthy collaboration, not just among scholars and the two of us, but also supporters and drawing on financial support from the Open Society Foundations, the World Bank, and most significantly, the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs. And I do want to pause to acknowledge colleagues here tonight and the incredible amount of work that has gone in to supporting our independent research over the years, but also these events to launch the database in Geneva today. So,
thank you, Ian. Thank you, Vincent, for hosting us, and thank you all for coming. I won't repeat everything that Ian said. Just know that it's doubly felt, and my gratitude for all of that. And yes, this is the work of lawyers, 200 lawyers actually, across about 50 countries, and about 7 years of work is what's required to study law in a comparative way to help us understand the protection of immigrants' rights. So it really is something that is humbling to be a part of, because we are standing on the shoulders of so many people who help support our work, both from a funding perspective, an administrative perspective, and a legal expertise perspective. So what I'll be presenting here today is more of a sort of demonstration of the database that we are launching. It's also an invitation to you all to actually click on the website, to actually go to the website URL, which is migrantrights.info. I will show you that later in case you forget. And you can go and explore it yourself. It is meant to be user-friendly. Not necessarily for lawyers at all. In fact, even non-lawyers like me can read it because I actually helped build it. So without any further ado, the presentation is going to be quite brief and to the point. I'm going to give a little bit of background about why we built the database, the methods that we use, which is very important to look under the hood so you know how we build it. I'll demonstrate the results, but it'll just be the tip of the iceberg. Like I said, an invitation to read on more. And then finally, I'll talk briefly about the next steps before handing things back over to Ian, who will talk about the applications of this work. So the impetus here relates a lot to what Vincent and Ian were just describing. There's a patchwork set of laws globally, and so there's a quest by member states, by civil society groups, by independent attorneys across the world who are advocates for migrant rights to have a common baseline. But there's also incomplete governance, and we need to know and take stock of where that incompletion lies. And so we need to actually monitor and collect data so that we understand what that landscape, what that horizon actually appears like. So to do this, we wanted to start with just two simple research questions, but that required a lot of work to actually address. The first is, what is the extent to which that rights are protected across states? This is a descriptive question, but when we can understand and describe the landscape, we can better help try to improve it. Second, we ask, what is correlated with the protection of migrant rights, such that we may be able to predict and anticipate it, but to also understand what might drive and generate more migrant rights protection in the future. So in this presentation, you'll hear our answers to these questions. So we engage in an extensive amount of legal coding. There are 65 binary indicators. By binary, I mean it's a 0 to 1 scale. All questions are basically yes and no questions. So yes, this right is protected. No, it is not. Occasionally, there's like a 0.5 answer where it's conditional. It's protected, but only if. These indicators are all based on the aforementioned International Migrants Bill of Rights, which is a wonderful consolidation of migrant rights throughout treaty law and international and global governance. And it's all drawn from widely ratified human rights treaties, such as those that Vincent earlier referenced. There are 17 categories of rights total, which we divide into these 17 categories for ease of reference to understand both the scope of rights, but also that which is specific to them. The 17 rights are these. I put them on this circle because this is this flower plot that you're going to be now seeing for the rest of the presentation. We evaluate the extent to which these types of rights are protected across a variety of different countries. So we'll go through these more later. We also evaluate these categories of rights across 36 countries. As you can see, it's quite global in reach. And thanks to the Swiss government's continued support of this work, we are now going to be able to add another 9 countries to this list. So it will be 45 countries in total by next year. And those new countries will include Scandinavian countries, more African countries, and East Asian countries like Japan and Korea, filling a couple of gaps that remain. But even with the 36 countries that you see displayed here, these 36 countries are the destination states of 70%, 70% of the world's immigrants today. So you're looking at the countries that are the principal receivers of immigrants. Our methods relate to the rigor of this work. We are really concerned with making sure that our legal coders are not just simply giving their opinion, but they're actually grounding their work in legal citations. So there is not a single code given by a coder that acknowledges the protection of a migrant right without a citation to the national law, to the statute, or to case law. And it's all done in legal citations relevant to that specific country. So if you are to look at a coding from Bangladesh, it is a reference directly to Bengali law. The coders are all independent, meaning they do not currently work for the government. They may have previously worked for the government, they may in the future, but at the time of coding they did not work for the government, so it's independent from government oversight, which grants us the objectivity that we're seeking. And we hire 2 coders per country, and this relieves us of worries about intercoder reliability bias to ensure that these codes are both checked, double-checked, and confirmed by consensus across these 2 highly qualified legal scholars that are experts in their country. They code double-blind, which means that one coder does not know what the other is coding, so that they are independent from one another as well. If there are any disputes, then they're reconciled. But luckily, about 90 to 95% of all codes are agreed upon initially. So really, that is very confirming to us, and obviously the coders work out any differences thereafter. We code both de jure protection, so what does it actually say in the law about migrant rights protections, but we also code an implementation score which acknowledges the extent to which the country's national government and agencies actually enforce and implement the laws that are on the books, so that they're not simply paper tigers. Finally, everything is standardized for aggregation across the 36 countries so that we are looking at apples and apples from country to country. What we get together are payoffs like what you see. These are global looks at what migrant rights look at, and we'll go through them one by one. So you may remember the 17 types of rights on a circle. Here they are, color-coded for groups of rights, but showing the extent to which these rights are protected across the 36 states. So when you look across these 36 states, what we can see here is that the rights that are most protected around the world are freedom of assembly, opinion, belief, and to a more limited extent, personhood. So these are more protected than many of the others that you see here. But then we can also take a look at all 17 categories together, but on a country-by-country basis. So here we have the protections adjusted for implementation. And by adjusted, what I mean is we take the implementation score, say it's like 65%, and we will multiply the protection score by that as a discounter. So if you protect it 100%, but you only implement 65, then the score is 65. It makes sense. The average around the world for protection is about 66. The average for implementation is about 65. And so worldwide average is around 65, 66%. But as you can see, there's quite a bit of variation across the different states. And the states that come out on top in this particular look are countries like Denmark, Spain, Brazil, and a number of others, which we'll see in a different graphic form in just a moment. I call these flower plots, by the way. They're kind of like spider plots, but not less creepy. So it's more the flower, you know. All right. Here you see the map that you saw earlier. The darker countries protect more migrant rights and more completely. And this is all de jure protection. So in the letter of the law, you see that certain countries are protecting more than others. Once we adjust for implementation differences, then you'll see the states become lighter and some of the differences change in who is protecting more or less. Certain countries that protect a lot more move up in the rankings, and others move down based on implementation differences. Another way to look at this that may be more visible is if we actually put them in list form. So as you can see, in terms of raw legal protection, unadjusted for implementation, the top countries in the world in terms of the coverage of immigrant rights protection are France, Brazil, and then Argentina, Italy, Spain, Greece, Ethiopia, and Mexico. If we adjust for implementation hereafter, then the list changes. It is shuffled by the differences in implementation. Now, the top country in the world in terms of complete protections of migrant rights is Denmark at 67, then followed by Spain, Brazil, Netherlands, Italy, Argentina, and then France, which previously topped the other list. Speaking of France, this is an example of a country profile, because on the database, when you go online and look at the database, you will be able to select a particular country and look at a complete profile of its rights protections. So here we see a look at France, which obviously is going to be a very positive plot with a big flower in the middle, because it does a very good job of protecting. And as you can see, protection is the one that's highlighted at the top of the screen. So we're only looking at protection. You can also look at implementation on its own or combine them together for an adjusted score, for a combined score. But also inside the country profiles, you can dig deeper and select a particular category of right and even a particular right itself. So in this particular example, I selected right number 6, which relates to the right to form trade unions and other associations. That's then highlighted in blue on the flower plot, and we can see that there's a full protection of this right in that particular question, and then it's implemented at around 85.7%. So it allows you to actually explore more deeply each of the rights down to the level of the specific right, or you can contextualize it according to this flower plot among all the rights and their implementation. Then, particularly if you're an attorney, but even if you're not, like me, and you're curious, where is this right coming from in France? You click on the legislation and you can check exactly which part of the French legal code protects this rights and substantiates the coding that you see here. And so here you can see exactly which laws are using it, are used to protect it. You can also use the website and the database to focus on different categories of rights. So if you don't want to focus on countries and you're more interested in general categories such as education rights or labor, etc., you can do so. In this case, I give the example of the rights related to expulsion, asylum, and non-refoulement. Here we show the right as it's protected across the 36 countries in the flower plot on the left, and you can see some countries are better than others. Some countries that score very high generally may be lower in this category, and vice versa. They may be high in this category even though they have a lower aggregate score across other rights. And again, you can also go deeper here. By digging deeper, you can go into detail on that particular right, selecting how a country does. In this case, I choose Morocco. And right number 7, the right to protection against expulsion, except following a legal judgment. Here we see that Morocco has a high protection score because it's protected, but a lower implementation score, suggesting that the government is not enforcing it to the full extent. Again, that right is highlighted in blue on the flower plot, which also contextualizes the extent to which this particular right is protected against others inside of the same category. And again, you can check the legislation behind that particular right in precisely the same way. You scroll down to right to protection against expulsion, except following a legal judgment, and bingo, you have access to the actual law. And I must emphasize that this is quite revolutionary from a legal perspective. Lawyers do not really work across borders, much as you heard of organizations like Médecins Sans Frontières, like Doctors Without Borders. The human body is the same across borders. The legal body is not. And so lawyers have a hard time actually looking comparatively, and advocates for that matter, looking across borders because everything is lost in translation. They do not have an expertise in that jurisdiction. No need for expertise anymore. This website provides it. So we also undertake a correlational analysis. And so what we find when we take a look at different types of countries and different variables related to the protection of migrant rights, what we find is that these rights are more likely to be protected in countries that are more democratic, more politically stable, less economically liberal, and that admit fewer immigrants. So that's right, this sounds like there's a trade-off between the amount of immigrants that you admit and the extent to which you might protect their rights, which is unfortunate because obviously it is the countries that receive the most immigrants that we must rely upon to actually protect the rights of immigrants. This is all based on other data sets that we use. So here we are doing bivariate regressions, a very simple statistical technique, but it just at least is suggestive of the correlations we might expect, not causation. So I should emphasize that. But we use the Polity 4 index for those of you who are some burgeoning social scientists, the Polity 4 index for democracy, the political fragility index for stability. We look at the index of economic freedom for economic liberalism, and then we just use raw admissions, migration flow scores from the United Nations and the OECD to determine the numbers of immigrants that come in. So what are our next steps? So I mentioned earlier we are going to pursue new cases, Scandinavian cases, which are really valuable, East Asian cases, and also more African cases. We are also going to, we're also conducting coding for 2023. All of the data that you saw here was relevant in 2020. Now we will have what I will be referring to as post-COVID data, which I think will be very interesting to see the extent to which states derogate on their obligations or fail to implement as well, or perhaps even do better. We will see. And so that's going to be very important. And then finally, we're going to be pursuing a variety of applications and also trying to inspire others to seize this resource to pursue their applications. Ian is going to be discussing what those applications might be. My parting gift to you is ways of staying in touch with us. So as you can see here, the website is migrantrights.info. And you can go on, the website is very much live and public and ready for you guys to explore. Preferably not during Ian's presentation because that would be rude. But I'm just kidding. You can explore it all you want. And then, of course, our contact details hereafter. So please do be in touch with us should you have ideas, feedback, or just want to chat. Ian and I, of course, are very much open, and I'll pass the floor back over to him.
Thank you so much. Very excited for the discussion that will come. By way of conclusion, I just wanted to highlight some of the uses that we are excited to promote and support of this database. First, we imagine advocates, policymakers, others making use of these data to inform decisions about policy decisions, lawmaking. So let's look at a couple of examples on important issues that cut across the mandates of various UN agencies: detention, labor rights, the right to health. So we ask about whether national law prohibits the detention of children on the basis of their status as a migrant. Of the 36 countries in the database, 13 states we found do prohibit such detention, 23 don't. Shifting to the requirement of an individualized determination before a migrant can be detained, we have 30 countries that we find in their laws such a requirement. The right to form trade unions, we heard about 26 countries. Whether the national law guarantees access to health care on a basis of equality with nationals, 19 countries, yes. And I think armed with these data, it becomes clear that a majority of member states hosting the majority of the world's migrants generally have good laws on the books in some of these areas, and it helps us also see which states have room for improvement. In that sense, I think we hope that this data can help stimulate a kind of race to the top, some appropriate light being shined on states where they have specific areas of national law that are not yet compliant with general international legal undertakings. And in each of those three areas of the database, the indicators that I just referenced, the detention indicators, the association rights, and the health rights, there's also very close overlap, as with several other indicators, with specific Global Compact for Migration undertakings. So there are several objectives that are very comparable to our indicators, and so in that sense, the database can also be used, especially as we start to add observations over time, to look at the success of states in these key rights areas that happen to also be covered by objectives in the GCM. As we evaluate how laws are implemented, I think that gives us even more power to the comparative analysis. And we can then drill down to specific laws, giving an opportunity for lawmakers or advocates to borrow legal language from statutes that are compliant with the international baseline in other jurisdictions. So in that sense, I think it provides a very good, not just research tool, but a practical tool to address this kind of comparative law problem and further incentivize the race to the top. As a litigator, I also recognize that in many jurisdictions, this kind of comparative data could be very useful to courts. So imagining not just immigration ministries or foreign ministries drawing on the database, but also litigators bringing to the attention of the courts how other jurisdictions are tackling the same problems that might be before judges in a particular country. Finally, in terms of sort of legal cases, I think for international law researchers, I think that I'm excited about the database as a place to ground further arguments about custom as we understand better how state national laws are compliant with the international baseline. Certainly we can ground more sophisticated arguments about treaty compliance for those states that are treaty parties, but I think we can also take forward important work that Professor Chitai has done about the status of migrants' rights in custom. As researchers, Justin's already highlighted some of the correlations and the ways that we can put our database in dialogue with other studies that have been done about other aspects of governance and law. And I just want to emphasize, as Justin underscored, that I think many, if not all, of these applications are uniquely empowered by this database. We really are excited about the way in which this is a unique contribution, and we hope that some of the kind of intractable puzzles in the areas of migration law and migration governance will be easier to continue to work towards solving with the data, the legal citations, and the additional research agenda to come. So thank you very much for your attention. We look forward to the continuation of the event. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much for this very clear presentation, and I'm sure that many of us will also, after this conference, go to and consult the database. I suggest maybe to move to the next stage of this event, and maybe to start with the video of Felipe González Morales, who is United Nations Special Rapporteur on the human rights of migrants, who has some words for us. He was not able to be here in presence. He is also not only UN Special Rapporteur, he is also Professor of International Law at the Diego Portales University in San Diego. And he has he was Commissioner and Rapporteur on migrants' rights in the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights from 2008 and 2015. So let's start with this video, and then we will continue for the panel, and after that, question and answer. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you very much for the work you are doing in this area, and we will continue the discussion in a few minutes. Thank you. Thank you again.
I am glad to participate at the official launch of the Migrant Rights Database at the Geneva Graduate Institute. Although I cannot attend this event in person, as I am nowadays in Chile, I am glad to be able to send this message and share with you my support for this important initiative. As the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Migrants, I have had the opportunity to see over the years that I have served in this mandate the very acute need for accurate data on the situation of migrants. There is much misinformation about migrants, either by associating them with criminals or by asserting that they represent a burden for the destination countries. There is also a lack of enough data regarding them, and this affects their enjoyment of human rights. States sometimes claim that they are actually guaranteeing and protecting adequately the human rights of migrants when it's not really the case or it's only partially. In this regard, the Migrants' Rights Database provides information about dozens of countries in several categories of human rights, and in this way, it makes easier to make the states accountable. The academia, the civil society, the international organizations make use of this database in order to ensure that states comply with their international obligations. The database analyzes a wide range of human rights of migrants, the issue of equal protection, the situation of those migrants in vulnerable situations, the right to education, to health, to labor, family, nationality, civil and political rights, and so forth. So, in all these respects, it's very important the information and the systematization of the data that is accomplished through the Migrants' Rights Database. It is also very important to consider that the database analyzes both the legislation and the implementation. And this is important because in many countries there is a wide disparity between the quality of the legislation regarding the human rights of migrants and their actual implementation. Throughout the process of a follow-up of the Global Compact for Migration, which indeed establishes as one of its key aspects the need to enhance data on migrants' rights, through the follow-up of the Global Compact, we have seen also this disparity between the legislation provisions and the implementation. So in this regard, the database would also be an important tool for the enhancement of human rights. I hope that the database is widely used by the different stakeholders, and I hope that this official launch goes very well as well. Thank you very much.
So now we will start with the panel discussion, and I'm very pleased to invite the two key experts who will share their views about the role of data in protecting migrants' rights. So I'm very pleased to welcome on stage the Professor Maya Salih-Fadel, who is vice chair of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, and also a special rapporteur on refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced persons, and migrants for the African Union. We are very pleased and proud to have you today. Thank you very much. Please come. And I'm very pleased also to welcome Dr. Coco Warner, who is the director of the Global Data Institute of International Organization for Migration. And she is a well-known climate expert who has extensively worked on human migration and displacement. Thank you very much to be here at Geneva with us and to share your views about the role of data in protecting migrants' rights. So maybe we can start with you, following your, I mean, I have no preference.
Yes.
Okay, so please.
Very good. Should I use a microphone?
Yes,
or
please.
is that all right? Hi, everyone. It's really nice to meet you here this evening. I'm sure many of you have had a very informative day for those of you who are over at the Palais, and congratulations again on this important database. Some of the things that we were talking about earlier today, I'll reflect on again. We know out in the world that there's big change afoot. And many who think about the world that we have and that we're headed into describe it as a volatile, uncertain, complex type of situation, and migration and other forms of human mobility play out against that. The drivers of movement are deeply interrelated. If you think just of the past couple of years, and the top things, not even very specific situations. We've had a pandemic. We have geopolitical tensions. We have conflicts, sometimes related to that. Climate change, food insecurity. And I could go on. And those are just some of the challenges that we've felt, let alone all of the economic and social repercussions. Data is the key to helping us understand how these big changes in the world affect us and affect people in here. And this database is so important because it helps us understand how are people doing and how are people doing in a framework of social norms and laws and other regulations. And that's crucially important. Depending on what part of the world you come from, there will be different ways that rules are based. But it's really useful and important to understand how are people moving and in what frameworks. Are they regular or irregular? Do they have protection or is there a lack? And if there is protection, is it actually applied to people's lives? Now, you mentioned climate change. We could talk so much, but I'm actually really eager to hear your comments, so I could just keep going. But one thing about climate change that's quite interesting is, unlike other areas where rights might be violated or where rights apply, climate change is something, the way that we're understanding it now, that all of us contribute to, and all of us feel in one way or another. And so some of the notions of rights and imminent threat and things like that very much are relevant for our day. But I think this is an incredibly interesting time to have a database like this and consider, how do we think about adverse impacts on people, whether it's individuals or groups or whole, groupings of people in a spatial area, and how do we think about living well and living with rights against the backdrop of this volatile, uncertain, and complex world that we have. So I think we have a lot of work ahead to actually utilize this database. The Swiss government has provided support for this, and congratulations again for your foresight to make this important work available, and thanks again to Cornell and also George Mason University.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, à l'entame de mes propos, je voulais tout d'abord remercier M. Vincent Gétel pour l'invitation et l'accueil qu'il nous a réservé au sein de cet institut. Également, je voudrais remercier l'Université Cornell en la personne de M. Yann, également M. Vincent, que je viens de connaître, notamment M. Yann, avec qui je collabore depuis déjà pratiquement 2 ans sur un projet par rapport à des lignes directrices sur la réponse africaine à la protection des migrants en Afrique. Alors, vous sentez très bien que je viens d'Afrique, que je suis africaine, et que donc je vais contextualiser cette question, justement, des migrants en Afrique. Et je suis également, comme cela a été annoncé précédemment, la rapporteure spéciale de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples sur les demandeurs d'asile, les réfugiés, les migrants et les déplacés internes en Afrique. Donc je m'occupe effectivement de toute la mobilité en Afrique. Je voudrais également contextualiser par rapport à ce lancement officiel de la base de données, qui est très intéressante, mais qu'il faudrait également replacer dans le contexte africain. Vous êtes en Europe, on a beaucoup parlé de la crise migratoire, parce qu'on considère que cette crise est liée justement aux migrants africains qui ont la possibilité parfois de franchir la forteresse Schengen et d'arriver en Europe. Mais il faut également comprendre que la grande mobilité africaine est une mobilité circulaire, c'est-à-dire que 80% de la migration se fait en Afrique. Seuls 20%, justement, de cette migration, de cette mobilité des personnes, essayent de franchir ce que j'appelle la forteresse Schengen. C'est donc dans ce contexte de mobilité en Afrique que je vais essayer également de voir comment est-ce que ces données, cette base de données, peut effectivement être utile au continent africain. Alors je reviendrai peut-être légèrement sur les causes de la migration en Afrique, parce qu'elles sont peut-être différentes de certaines causes dans d'autres régions du monde. Elles sont nombreuses. Alors je vais dire tout d'abord la mauvaise gouvernance, les conditions socio-économiques, la pauvreté. Nous avons également les exactions, c'est-à-dire les violations des droits de l'homme, les conflits, et ça c'est une cause récurrente, et de plus en plus, comme venait de s'exprimer Madame, les changements climatiques qui poussent également à des déplacements forcés. Donc les causes sont nombreuses, et généralement, lorsque ces déplacements s'effectuent, quelle que soit la route migratoire ou la trajectoire migratoire, que ce soit vers l'Afrique de l'Ouest, vers l'Afrique du Nord, vers l'Afrique de l'Est, les conditions de ces migrants, qu'il s'agisse notamment de l'état de départ, l'état de transit ou l'état de destination, sont les mêmes. C'est-à-dire que tous ces mouvements migratoires de différentes catégories, je dirais pourquoi migratoires de différentes catégories, parce qu'on élargit la notion de migrant à celle notamment de celui qui va être demandeur d'asile et réfugié, aux migrants économiques, et puis nous avons cette migration interne qui concerne les déplacés internes en Afrique et qui sont nombreux. Mais on va surtout parler justement de cette migration transfrontalière. Donc toutes ces populations qui utilisent des couloirs migratoires vont subir de nombreuses violations des droits de l'homme. Et lorsque des États accueillent ces migrants, parfois parce que ce sont des États, je dirais, de transit, on peut rester 2 ans, 3 ans dans un État, mais avec toujours la perception de vouloir aller ailleurs. Ou alors, lorsqu'on est également un État d'accueil, il faut dire que les pays africains, je crois que ça a été également rappelé, ratifient les conventions internationales et régionales. D'ailleurs, on leur rappelle très souvent au sein de la Commission africaine en leur disant il faut, par exemple, ratifier telle ou telle convention qui permet de protéger les droits de l'homme. Ils les ratifient effectivement, mais, comme cela a été constaté, c'est le problème de la domestication de ces conventions qui pose problème. On les ratifie, on hésite à les appliquer, ou alors, lorsqu'il y a domestication de ces conventions, dans des lois internes, notamment pour ceux des États, et je l'ai vu notamment par rapport aux données que vous avez présentées, puisque vos exemples touchaient à peu près 5 États africains, seuls certains États se préoccupent de la protection des droits des migrants. C'est-à-dire qu'il est rare de trouver des législations où il est fait expressis verbis allusion à la protection des migrants. Généralement, si on adopte une législation dans beaucoup de pays africains, c'est une législation peut-être qui concerne surtout la gestion de la migration, et encore qu'elles existent très très peu. Sinon, les États vont se réfugier dans ce qu'on appelle des plans nationaux sur la migration, des stratégies nationales sur la migration, c'est-à-dire des textes de soft law qui très souvent vont être accompagnés de plans d'action sur 3 ans, 4 ans, 5 ans, 10 ans parfois. Et lorsqu'on est appelé à examiner ces stratégies, ou même ces lois, si elles existent, il y a un petit chapitre qui peut faire référence à la protection des droits des migrants. Toutes ces stratégies, toutes ces politiques, au contraire, vont verser beaucoup plus dans le volet protection, le volet sécuritaire, au détriment de la dimension humanitaire. Ce sont également des lois qui vont organiser la gestion de la migration à l'intérieur de ces pays. On va gérer des migrants réguliers et on va peut-être gérer également des migrants irréguliers, de manière informelle d'ailleurs, pour des migrants irréguliers. Donc il y a ici effectivement cette ambivalence entre une protection qui va effectivement toucher ceux qui sont arrivés de manière régulière, ce sont donc des travailleurs réguliers. Par contre, pour les autres, ils vont effectivement s'adonner au travail informel, etc. Mais dans les deux catégories, il y a effectivement des violations des droits de l'homme, absence de protection des droits des migrants. Donc le contexte africain est un contexte qui accueille effectivement des politiques migratoires, mais qui, sur le plan de la protection, reste très aléatoire. Alors, accueillir effectivement ces bases de données, c'est effectivement intéressant, j'ai lu et j'ai relu, c'est effectivement également, je dirais, une bouée de sauvetage pour les pays africains. Encore faut-il que cette base de données puisse effectivement être largement disséminée, publiée à l'endroit des États africains. Et c'est là où, justement, j'interpelle ceux qui sont à la source de ces bases de données. D'abord parce qu'elles sont différentes des bases de données sur la migration qu'on a l'habitude d'exploiter, notamment les bases qui sont élaborées par l'OIM, où l'on retrouve notamment une division par catégorie de personnes, par sexe, par nationalité, par sous-région, etc. Là, au contraire, ce sont des bases de données qui vont analyser l'existence de lois nationales sur la protection des droits, certains droits, peut-être pas tous, là vous en avez identifié 15, et c'est également une base de données qui est tout à fait nouvelle dans la mesure où elle interpelle les États sur la nécessité, parfois même l'obligation, de respecter les droits des migrants. Alors, pour justement les objectifs futurs, je m'adresse à M. Yann également, il serait intéressant d'élargir l'examen par rapport à d'autres États africains, parce qu'ils en ont vraiment besoin. Il y a un manque justement de statistiques et de ce qu'on appelle des données désagrégées concernant la migration, si ce n'est notamment les données qui nous parviennent de l'OIM ou parfois de certains instituts de statistiques ou certains centres de recherche académiques qui effectivement explorent des statistiques sur la migration. Ce qui serait intéressant donc, c'est, comme vous l'avez dit, pour les prochaines étapes, donc d'explorer également et d'inviter d'autres États à travailler sur des données sur la protection des droits des migrants, c'est très important. Et ce que je vous propose surtout, c'est d'élargir l'information. Et à ce titre, je voudrais peut-être vous inviter, puisque nous allons avoir au mois de mai, au sein de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples, notre session ordinaire, ce serait d'organiser un panel de discussion, puisqu'il y aura la session publique, enfin, mais nous serons peut-être en présentiel, parce que les budgets sont tels qu'on ne peut pas revenir constamment aux sessions en présentiel. Mais pour la session du mois de mai, j'ai d'ailleurs réfléchi, c'est la proposition que je vous fais, c'est d'avoir un panel de discussion pour présenter ces bases de données. Les États seront présents. Ce sera une manière justement de les informer de l'existence de cette base de données et d'expliquer effectivement en quoi consiste cette base de données, quels seraient effectivement les objectifs assignés à cette base de données par rapport à des États qui, jusqu'à l'heure d'aujourd'hui, ne se sont pas dotés encore de lois pour protéger les migrants, et également avoir la possibilité de discuter avec également de la société civile qui sera présente, et peut-être même de se réapproprier cette base de données pour déjà commencer à expliquer dans un certain nombre d'États, par rapport notamment à des populations vulnérables, quelle est l'importance de la protection des droits des migrants. Donc l'utilité est très importante, surtout sur le continent africain. Le rôle également que peuvent jouer ces données, ça peut être également un rôle d'incitation des États à vouloir se réapproprier ces données, et ça permettra également, je dirais, de déconstruire un petit peu la manière dont les États africains utilisent la politique migratoire dans le sens notamment de la sécurité, dans le sens également de la lutte contre le terrorisme, et également déconstruire un petit peu cette idée d'être préoccupé par la présence de migrants sur leur territoire. Parce que très souvent, lorsque ces migrants sont sur le territoire, je ne veux pas vous rappeler, il y a une dizaine de jours, les propos qui ont été tenus par des autorités tunisiennes à l'endroit de migrants subsahariens, alors que la Tunisie accueillait et intégrait des migrants. Donc pourquoi ce revirement? Bon, il y a eu effectivement un rattrapage depuis 2 jours, mais il est important que ce type, notamment, de discours ne prenne pas le dessus, encore une fois, sur la protection des migrants. Parce que vous savez, c'est très contagieux. Même lorsque vous avez évoqué dans vos données l'Afrique du Sud était très avancée dans la protection des migrants. Mais depuis 2015, on s'aperçoit qu'il y a quand même des politiques et des pratiques xénophobes à l'endroit de certains migrants. Donc il est important de dire que cette base de données est effectivement, je dirais, un point, d'honneur pour les pays africains, faire en sorte tout d'abord de communiquer, d'informer, de la rendre effective et efficace, et surtout pouvoir la disséminer. Et je vous donne justement ici l'occasion de le faire au mois de mai. Voilà, je vous remercie.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Very interesting in the sense that, of course, I mean, today the most worrying aspect, which was witnessed also last few days ago in Tunisia, is the exploitation of the populist rhetoric, the Western populist rhetoric, which is now no longer limited to Western states. And clearly, of course, I mean, this is not fundamentally new. Migrants as a perfect target for political manipulations, and clearly here a state like Tunisia, who has a long tradition of hospitality, like many other states in the region, but especially Tunisia, a border state to Libya, with a long tradition of hospitality. This is an important signal. First, that of course, migrants are still the perfect excuse for illiberal democracies. And second, we need to be careful about the way human rights of migrants are implemented at the domestic level, because here is a key issue. There are political factors, but there are many others, in the sense that the poor incorporation of international in domestic order, as mentioned by the commissioner, is also part of the picture, in the sense that there are some political obstacles, but also more technical ones. And clearly here, capacity building, your databases can make a difference and can be also used more on a daily basis to create also to spread some ideas, models, as mentioned before. I would like to give you the floor again. Given your experience as director of the Global Data Institute, of course, your experience as an expert, a major expert, what is your view about the role of data? What are the key lessons learned in using data, to protect migrants' rights, but also to ensure that there is a more evidence-based, dispassionate discourse surrounding migration? Please.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll mention 3 that come to mind, and they are data for action, data for insight, and data for foresight. As I mentioned in the beginning, data, we're just in this really interesting time. And for those of you who are a little bit younger, how lucky, because you're digital natives. And you know a world that some of us didn't. Just coming over here, my son sent me a little message. He has plans with his other teenage friends to go to Spain for summer holidays. So as I looked up the information that he sent me, another piece of information which was attached, which is how much it could cost to actually get there. Now you know this as your generation. You know that we're in this amazing time of data where we put together not just the thing that we think we want, but additional pieces of relevant information. And that then informs our action. And in the best case, that's really helpful because we get packages or bundles of information that help us steer and decide which way do we go. Now, when it comes to people, migrants, and other people on the move, understanding their rights, bringing it back to this important initiative, and understanding relevant factors. I found what you were saying, even though my French is very poor. But I got the main ideas of what you were saying. It's so helpful to understand not just a person or a group of people and their rights and whether or not they're fully enforced or not in place at all. It's the time when we have data available that can help us put that in context. And that is so necessary to understand what are the right actions to take now in a volatile, uncertain, complex world. And that's something that governments and municipalities who might host or who may send or may have people moving through also need to know. So one, data for action. Data for insight is very closely related to that. One thing that we're hearing a lot from countries who come to IOM is they'll ask questions about, well, how are the drivers interacting, the drivers of human mobility? And I'm using that term. I know here we're talking about migrant rights, but I'm also aware there's so many different forms, so I'll just say human mobility as a shorthand. But governments want to understand how are people moving, what are the patterns, and do those patterns have linkages with what governments themselves do? What are the relationships? In the country that I come from, we have decades, if not more, of policies and norms and law enforcement and different things around our southern border. And really pertinent political questions surface. Does it matter? Does it matter normatively and also in a value sense? Because we're all human and we're all in Geneva and we know what this city stands for, among many others. But we do care about human rights. When we care about many other things, we care about people being safe and well. But having insights between, is this policy effective? Is it effective for a particular reason? Does it help people in other ways? These are all things that data can provide insights to. And again, it helps us make sense of our world and act well together in this world. And the last thing that I would say is again linked to the first, data for insight and data for action. And that is, how do we prepare? Climate change is just one of a number of things that are driving our world. Technology is a big thing. For those of us who switched from working in offices to working a lot on platforms like Zoom or Teams or WebEx or whatever your choice of interaction is, the pandemic has driven a change in labor markets. Who would have imagined that? Data can help give us the foresight to understand how the worlds of work are changing and how that affects migrants, how the worlds in our habitable space, our environment and climate are changing. That certainly already is affecting people on the move. And I could go on and on. But data is something that brings us together. Again, just bringing it back to this wonderful initiative. Data gives us insight. It helps us know better what to do. And of course, none of us has a crystal ball, but we do need to be informed about possible scenarios. How would we react if? How do we prepare our societies for change? What can we do in our realm? And that's all part of foresight. Maybe the last thing that I would say, I think there's a lot to be said in this realm of migrant rights and understanding what's there, what's not there, and how things are enforced or not, precisely because our world is changing. We can often look at those who go before us or who might experience something that could be pertinent to what we in our individual lives or in our whatever role we're playing. Migrants are certainly a group like that, whether it is about how a group is stigmatized or welcomed into a society. And I know I keep coming back to climate change. I will stop. I don't want to bore you. But with climate change, things are changing. And we all see it, depending on what places in the world, people on the move, and how we manage that. Whether, again, I use the word stigma or welcoming, how we reach agreements about what's okay and what's not okay, is also really helpful for us to know, because when it comes to things like climate change, most of us will go one way or another into an uncertain situation. And what we want to be familiar with is a set of norms and laws and regulations that allow people to live well. And really, I'm coming back to that because we are neighbors, and some of us are more privileged than others, but there are economists who think that the way you treat the worst off person in your society is kind of symbolic of how everyone in society is treated or could be treated. So back to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very inspiring speech. I'm turning to you, Professor Sedifael. Quels sont pour vous les moyens, les causes et les moyens d'adresser le manque de respect des droits fondamentaux des migrants? Et dans quelle manière le rôle des databases, vous l'avez déjà abordé précédemment, mais quels sont, au-delà, évidemment, des obstacles politiques que vous avez évoqués, le risque, le développement de la rhétorique anti-migrants qui n'a plus de frontières, et qui est utilisée dans des pays aussi d'hospitalité traditionnelle aujourd'hui. Quels sont, et surtout aussi sur la base de votre expérience comme rapporteur spécial, votre longue expérience comme commissaire au sein de l'Union africaine, quels sont les autres moyens de promouvoir les droits des migrants selon vous?
Merci. Vaste question. Oui. Vaste, qui pourrait faire l'objet d'une autre conférence. Voilà. Oui. Alors, sans pour autant revenir, je dirais, aux positions des États africains qui, effectivement, ne se sont pas du tout penchés sur l'idée même de protéger les droits des migrants. Voilà, donc ce n'est pas, je dirais, une préoccupation majeure. Je l'ai dit précédemment, lorsqu'on est appelé à examiner les stratégies, les politiques, etc., on est beaucoup plus soucieux d'organiser la gestion de ces migrants à l'intérieur des pays. Alors, sur ce, on va aborder notamment, on va dire, bon, il y a d'abord des causes politiques, on est un peu réfractaire à l'accueil de migrants, mais ils sont là, qu'est-ce qu'on en fait? Donc il y a des causes politiques, j'ai dit, il y a des causes sécuritaires, des causes socio-économiques, il y a également la question de l'accueil de ces migrants par les communautés. Et ça, c'est important. Ça, c'est un aspect sociologique qui est très peu abordé. Comment ces migrants sont perçus par les populations locales. C'est ce qui pousse d'ailleurs parfois à des manifestations telles que celles qu'on a vues dernièrement en Tunisie et peut-être même dans d'autres pays. Mais ce qui serait notamment important, c'est tout d'abord de renforcer les capacités des autorités étatiques pour la compréhension même de la question migratoire. Et si je reviens notamment à l'Union africaine, c'est-à-dire notre organisation régionale, qui a mis en place un cadre de politique migratoire. Et ce cadre de politique migratoire de l'Union africaine fait la relation entre migration et développement. C'est-à-dire que l'on voit dans la migration un potentiel économique de développement, également un potentiel d'intégration. Ce sur quoi il faudrait travailler avec les États, je le dis d'ailleurs de par mon expérience, je vous donne l'exemple par exemple des États qui présentent leur rapport périodique devant la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples. Donc ce sont des rapports tels que ceux qui sont présentés devant les organes conventionnels, je dirais peut-être même à l'image de l'examen périodique universel, qui est notre mécanisme. Dans leur rapport, très peu d'États font référence notamment aux migrants, alors que nous savons très bien que ce sont des États qui accueillent des migrants. Et en ma qualité de rapporteur spécial sur les migrants, donc je les interpelle pour leur dire, mais vous recevez des migrants, vous êtes des pays d'accueil, parfois même de transit, mais votre rapport ne dit rien sur la manière dont vous accueillez ces migrants, la manière dont vous gérez la question migratoire dans vos pays, et il y a absence totale de référence à des textes législatifs ou des politiques nationales. Donc c'est un moyen de les interpeller, et lorsque nous faisons nos observations finales, nous élaborons nos observations finales, qui sont donc des recommandations, je recommande à ces États justement d'aller vers l'adoption de lois nationales sur la migration, dans lesquelles on doit retrouver également un focus sur la protection des droits des migrants. Alors là, il faut également, comme je le disais précédemment, il faut que les autorités nationales puissent prendre conscience de l'importance de la migration. D'autant plus qu'on s'inscrit de plus en plus maintenant par rapport au pacte mondial sur la migration, sur une gouvernance mondiale de la migration. C'est-à-dire qu'il ne faut plus voir la question migratoire comme étant la crise migratoire, mais au contraire comme étant, je dirais, un potentiel économique important, un potentiel également de circulation des personnes et surtout d'intégration. Or, au niveau des pays africains, nous avons des tendances différentes. Comme cela a été dit, peu de pays, justement, gardent un regard positif sur la présence de migrants. Et ce qui est également important, ce serait donc de sensibiliser les autorités, de renforcer leur capacité de compréhension, ce que le migrant peut apporter à leur économie, même dans le cadre du brassage socioculturel, c'est très important. Et il faudrait également mettre en place des institutions. Là aussi, il y a une faiblesse institutionnelle, c'est-à-dire qu'il n'y a pas d'institutions qui, très souvent, prennent en charge la question migratoire, si ce n'est peut-être quelques académies, quelques centres de recherche qui travaillent sur la migration, ou encore quelques organisations de la société civile qui prennent en charge la question de la migration. Donc il y a plusieurs pistes sur lesquelles je travaille, avec notamment les États, avec des organisations de la société civile, avec des centres également de recherche. Je pense au centre de Pretoria, de M. Franz notamment, puisqu'il y a une unité qui travaille sur la migration, et apporter effectivement des éléments positifs en ce qui concerne la perception même du migrant. Alors, c'est un petit peu peut-être, je dirais, contradictoire en Afrique, dans la mesure où on a quand même cet esprit de solidarité, d'accueil, d'hospitalité. Mais il faut dire que cet état d'esprit d'hospitalité et d'accueil a été extraverti, en quelque sorte. Parce qu'avec ces grands mouvements migratoires, on y voit, comme je l'ai dit, des dangers. On a même développé un discours où on a dit que c'était notamment des personnes violentes, qui ramenaient notamment des fléaux. Il faut donc procéder parfois, moi je n'aime pas utiliser le terme d'expulsion, mais des reconductions à la frontière massive, etc. Alors je crois qu'il y a tout un travail à faire, tant au niveau des institutions, au niveau des autorités locales, au niveau des populations également. Et je crois que le rôle important viendra de la société civile, à condition que cette société civile également soit suffisamment imprégnée de ces questions migratoires, et également des centres de recherche qui peuvent jouer un rôle très important. Et là, il faudrait également créer ce que j'appellerais des synergies entre tous ces acteurs, de manière à porter haut et fort la question de la migration. Mais c'est vrai que c'est très difficile encore à l'heure actuelle de discuter avec les États africains. Alors, tant qu'on est dans le processus de la Commission de l'Union africaine, effectivement, il y a un emballement pour dire que la migration, nous en avons besoin, c'est un facteur de développement. L'Afrique est en train de développer une zone de libre-échange continentale, c'est-à-dire liberté de circulation des biens, des services. Par contre, il y a un protocole sur la libre circulation des personnes et le droit de résidence où seulement 2 États l'ont ratifié, contrairement à la zone de libre-échange économique. Or, ça ne peut pas marcher, on ne peut pas échanger, avoir cette liberté de circulation des marchandises, des investissements, etc., si elle n'est pas accompagnée en parallèle d'une liberté de circulation des personnes. Et là, il y a effectivement des groupes d'États qui sont hostiles à ce protocole de libre circulation des personnes. Je dis franchement, les États d'Afrique du Nord, l'Afrique du Sud également, des grands États qui voient notamment dans cette liberté de circulation peut-être un afflux de migrants qui iraient s'installer, par exemple, en Afrique du Nord. C'est un petit peu l'Eldorado par rapport aux conditions socio-économiques, etc., que vivent les migrants subsahariens dans leur pays, par rapport également au manque de stabilité dans leur pays. Et je crois qu'au sein de l'Union africaine, on revient toujours à la même question, travailler sur les causes profondes de ces déplacements forcés. Or, les causes sont connues. S'il y a constamment des conflits, vous pensez bien que les gens vont fuir. Alors, soit ils vont prendre la route, je dirais, de l'asile, du réfugié, parce que là, ce sont des réfugiés de masse, ce n'est pas le réfugié politique, etc. Ou alors, c'est le déplacé interne. Sur ce plan, nous avons la primeur avec la Convention de Kampala, c'est la seule qui existe notamment et qui prend en charge l'assistance et la protection des déplacés internes, mais cela ne suffit pas. Et les pays africains sont interpellés pour travailler sur les causes profondes, justement, de ces déplacements forcés. Sinon, ce sera effectivement la locomotive. On continuera encore à recevoir des migrants. Certains pays vont avoir des politiques hostiles, etc. Et très peu de pays sont en train de faire des efforts pour accueillir des migrants, pour essayer également de les protéger, parce que la protection des migrants, ce n'est pas simplement dans le pays d'accueil, donc de destination. Protection des migrants, c'est pendant également la trajectoire migratoire. C'est là où il y a le plus de violations des droits de l'homme, la traite des personnes, les violences sexuelles contre les femmes, des crimes également, bon, on peut les appeler des exécutions extrajudiciaires, toutes les violences que subissent les migrants durant ce parcours migratoire, même des disparitions. J'ajouterai également le problème des migrants disparus en mer. C'est un très gros problème. Et là, nous avons eu la primeur au sein de la Commission africaine d'adopter une résolution spécifique sur les migrants disparus et sur lesquels nous travaillons justement avec le Comité international de la Croix-Rouge, CICR. Et dernièrement, cette question a été inscrite justement à l'agenda de la Commission de l'Union africaine. Donc on est arrivé à le faire et ça c'est important. Donc je pense qu'il y a plusieurs pistes de réflexion. Le tout c'est de pouvoir utiliser les bons outils de manière à prendre en main cette question.
Thank you very much. I mean, we could stay several hours to hear both of you about all these issues. This is very interesting. Unfortunately, of course, I mean, the time is running. I would like to, first of all, of course, thank you, but continue the discussion maybe to take some questions from the audience. And so feel free to raise your hand, share your views. And as usual, you know, questions more than a long player or discussions because, again, time is running. So please raise your questions to our two major experts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very quick question to the two gentlemen in the front about the database. thinking of, for example, European countries, my question is, they treat migrants very differently. For example, migrants within the Schengen area, then third country migrants, and then refugees. So how do you plan on take account like of this reality in the database? Also, maybe not yet, but for a future project.
Thanks. It's a great question. Ian can also expand upon what I'm about to say, but just from an empirical perspective, some of the questions are specific to refugees or to irregular migrants, and so in that case, there's no worries. In other cases, you're right, and that there are sometimes different rights for different types of immigrants depending on their status or their visa class, etc. When that happens, we ask our coders whether that's the case. And so in some cases, we basically have a blanket rule about the coding where we say if anyone is excluded, then the right is not protected. But in most cases, what we do is we say if there are contingencies where it's only a certain type of immigrant that's covered, the scoring is adjusted to, instead of a 0 versus 1, to a 0.5 or a 0.75, something like that, to account for that conditionality.
The only thing I would add is just that from our, the general perspective is that the definition of migrant and the definition of migrant for the database includes all categories of migrants. So even migrants like refugees who would be protected with a complementary body of law, because the general framework of human rights law would apply to all migrants, that we you know, most of the questions are focused in that way. So thank you.
You can go. Yeah, thank you very much. My question also, it go for the two gentlemen sitting in front nearest to me about, and thank you very much for the data. I appreciate, really appreciate. And yes, our topic of our session this evening, it's data and role of data for migrants to protect their own rights. Yes, data for weather, how much it is useful for weather, climate, it's useful for aviation, for maritime circulation. But as Mrs. Sahli, she just raised, only 20% of Africans try to cross to Europe. But what is Europe? Europe, it is Schengen, legal treaty. What is Schengen? Schengen is the farthest village in Europe. Schengen and Dublin. Dublin is the farthest city in Europe. But in the African continent, there is no legal treaty like Schengen. There is no legal treaty like... So my question to you, it is how about the personal data of those potential migrants or migrants because they are not already citizens and they may be not citizens, which is, it is personal and because le droit pénal and le droit de migrant like a criminal. And another short question to Mrs. Warner. Last week we got a PDD, Platform Disaster Displacement. And what is DD? DD, it is a climate migrant management, maybe in the future. But how about the data in this perspective? As I see, IOM, it was very engaged in the PDD. And thank you very much for all.
So I'll just briefly emphasize that, so there's not a specific question, I don't believe, in the indicators about data privacy in relation to migration procedures, but certainly, you know, any number of rights that relate to those concepts are reflected, and there are, you know, several indicators evaluating due process and other protections in the context of migration procedures. So I think in that sense, some of those key issues that you raise are certainly reflected in the database, and others may have further thoughts on that. And then I think I bring this to you, right? Oh, you have another one? Okay, great.
Thanks. I didn't quite understand the question, so I could either make something up or say something that I wanted to say anyway, or could you repeat the question?
Yes, the platform displacement, disaster displacement, last week we got a very interesting workshop between experts and civil society and academicians from all over the world. It hosted in Geneva, and IOM, it's really engaged in that, but it is a project, an ambitious project for migrant expert analysts, like the team of Mr. Vincent, and disaster displacement as expert they are looking at nowadays. It's a kind of climate migrant management for the future. So you are dealing with the global data in IOM, and I see IOM, they are really engaged in this platform. But I said maybe it start. You have some data, or you could be more dedicated on that.
Yeah. Okay, great. Now I have 3 things to say. The 2 other things that I was going to try and sneak in anyway. And platform and disaster displacement, for those of you who work in that space of hazards that come up, big shocks, maybe not foreseen, or even climate change, this is a really appreciated platform. And to call you out again, I think the Swiss government, among others, has been really important in providing stability and support for this platform. One of the things, the acronym is PDD, Platform and Disaster Displacement. One of the things that PDD has done a really good job at, it's provided a space for countries to come together and talk about what they're doing, how they're facing certain situations and the topic is on displacement, particularly related to disasters. And so what's really interesting is the PDD over the many years has gone out to different regions of the world. They've convened governments as well as civil society and academics. And it's essentially provided a safe space for governments to exchange, what do you do when this thing happens? Or what do you do? What are emerging trends? And the reason that I mention that is what I said before, climate change is unfolding. It's not here in its full brunt yet. It is unfolding very rapidly. But this means that many of us who work in that space don't quite know what to do. And so providing spaces where governments are typical, those are the typical kind of audience for United Nations agencies, but you as well play a really important role. But it's really important for that exchange to take place. Right now, a very common practice, many European countries do this, many other countries have something called TPS, Temporary Protection Status. Now, in my country, the way TPS works is if there's a big extreme event, whether it's an earthquake or a cyclone or whatever, often the country that is already hosting migrants, be they regular or irregular, will waive visa requirements for a little while. Why do they do that? So that people can continue working and send remittances back home to help. That's really, really important. We know that migrants all around the world are a powerful, positive force for development. They help send children to school. They help build communities. There's lots and lots that all of you know much better about the power of remittances. So this is one kind of practice that you'll hear at any one of the Platform on Disaster Displacement's regional meetings. Now, the meeting that you referred to last week, PDD has gone through several generations, and it's typical for any of you who sit on boards or are part of an organization that has a board. Every few years, the board will get together and say, okay, how have you done? And do we continue? And if so, what should the direction be? And that's what the meeting last week was all about. And there is, I think, not that my opinion matters, but there's a lot of potential to understand even more what are some of the practices on the horizon if people are moving in relation to climate change or other things. But here we're talking about climate change. If people are moving, how is that being managed? Can it be managed a little bit better? Are there coordination mechanisms that are needed? What does the data tell us about the needs of people who are on the move? But not just that, what about the sending communities, the transit communities, and the areas of destination? Data, of course, plays a role in providing insights to that, But again, this is just one trend that we already have, but it is emerging, where it's so important to understand, what are you doing? Is it working? Is it not working? What should I do? Because that is the world that we're in, and data plays a role in that. And this wonderful, I keep like passing the baton to you, this wonderful data initiative provides us some insights and ideas for the future.
And I will say that the world, the whole global governance, global migration governance has started like this. I mean, in the sense that it has started with form of discussion, as you mentioned, creating an habit of state interaction and confidence building before creating an impetus towards the adoption of two global compacts. So clearly, there is also here a path, a possible path to be continued, and only the starting point for a new development in this area, because there are many other things to be done also within through the guidelines developed through the Nansen Initiative as well, clearly. Let's continue with one or two questions from, please, and here and here.
I just had a question here. If I may, also about the database, I was curious to know how you have coded, what kind of indicators you have developed for measuring the implementation of the protection of rights.
Sure, it's an excellent question, and I know we have other questions, so I'll be brief. We ask, every time a coder indicates that a right is protected, we then ask to what extent they're protected on a 5.0 ordinal scale, and then they rate it. Note that that is different from the way that they code the law. When they code the law, they have to cite statute. We don't ask them to cite like a specific outcome. So for instance, you know, if with the union question, you can imagine maybe we would ask the French coder, okay, well, what share of migrants are in unions? Unfortunately, that is not a statistic, and many of them are not, that are easily accessible, and in many cases, they're not even measured. And so what we have found by looking at other studies have done is that a subjective evaluation is about the best we can do under the managing expectations of data access and availability, or even completion. And so that's the way we ask. And then just like with the legal protections, sometimes the coders disagree. If they disagree, if it's close enough, then there's no issue because it's very close. There's basically a consensus. But if there's wide disagreement, again, there's a reconciliation process where they finally agree on a consensus code. Sure.
Again, for the two gentlemen, I'm sorry. Very exciting tool. Congratulations. I was just looking at the presentation. I was just wondering the period of COVID. 2 years and a half. Probably we had a lot of laws not any longer implemented or modified, or new regulations coming up. How this affected your work? How this has been reflected into the database?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So we will not know, but we don't know, but we will know. Because the data that you just saw was coded for 2020, and everything was relevant as of January 1, 2020. And so the next set of data will be relevant for January 1 of 2023. And so we will be able to have a before and after picture to show everyone about the effect of COVID. We have hypotheses, and I'm going to give the microphone over to Ian to discuss, but if you think about COVID from a migration perspective, obviously there is an immediate lockdown and closure of borders and consulates, visa provision, by almost all countries on earth. But COVID combines the sort of worst of human stereotypes and expectations from foreigners. Not only do you have the usual suspicions about foreigners that are prevalent now in nativist circles and far-right circles around both Europe and elsewhere, but then you add to that contagion the fear of disease spreading from foreigners, right? Which of course is preposterous because, you know, the home country nationals also were spreading disease as well. But nevertheless, rhetorically, it had quite a strong effect. And so we have priors that it likely did not help the protection of rights, but we'll know more soon. And Ian has actually conducted preliminary research into this already.
Yeah, I mean, I think our overarching hypothesis is that we will primarily see the effect in the implementation score and not as much in the de jure protections, because I think a lot of COVID-related immigration law and policy making was done sort of through exceptional application of existing laws as opposed to quick promulgation of new legal frameworks. So I think that's the overarching question. And I'm happy to talk more in the reception, but in the interest of time, let's take another question.
Thank you very much for taking my question. I found this really interesting. I just wanted a little bit flippant, maybe a stupid question, but if we could compare this database, if it had been done 20 years ago, how would it look different from how it looks today? Anybody want to take that? I don't know.
Anyone who answers would be speculating because we know that data doesn't exist. Certainly it's an ambition, right, to be able to go back in time, right? But it's hard because it would be asking coders to not, who are experts on the law today, to actually look back in a sort of, frozen moment in time and what it would look like then. I think that the best people to ask are actually the in-country experts about what they've seen and observed in their own specific countries. But I would invite our panel, to the extent that they are, thinking about regions of their expertise, the extent to which they think that laws have gotten perhaps stronger in either protection or implementation.
Thank you very much. We have to stop now because time is running, and you are, all welcome to the reception. Thanks to the support of the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs. Just, you can just on your left when you are going out. Out this room. Thank you very much. I would like to thank you all the two experts first for this panel, and obviously the founders and architects of this great database. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for watching. Keep informed on our activities by following us on social media or by signing up to our newsletter on www.graduateinstitute.ch/GMC.